And today we have a really great group of investors who can offer a wide range of perspectives on all these trends driving the growth, from small specialist firms to corporate venture funds to transatlantic teams. And we'll talk about everything from early stage company building all the way to exits. And hopefully we can address as much of those as possible. But still, I want to start with COVID-19, which everyone is probably a bit tired of discussing, but then it's still so important for setting the stage moving forward. So let's take everyone inside the virtual rooms, the Zoom rooms, Teams, WebEx, or what have you. So how have you been operating during the pandemic, and what practices do you think are here to stay? What's the new normal? And perhaps we can start with Debbie. I know you have some interesting stories about things you've never done before the pandemic.
Yeah, thanks, Amber. Great to be here. Hello, everybody. Debbie Harland from SR1. Yeah, it's certainly been an interesting time, hasn't it? I mean, I think it's probably 15 months that we've all been looking at each other on little boxes on screens. It seems like yesterday, but it's been a very long time. And certainly from my personal perspective and also from the perspective of SR1, it's been a momentous time, really. So venture, as you know, as everybody I think will agree, is a very people and relationship driven business. So like everybody else, it's been a bit bizarre not to be able to meet face to face in some conditions, which is critical to our business. But certainly from SR1's perspective, we managed to spin out the fund from GSK. We managed to do a single close on $500 million. We've had 4 companies IPO, 2 major M&As, and I'm sure the rest of my colleagues have very similar stories. All of that without meeting anybody face to face, right? So we raised the fund without meeting LPs face to face. First time fund, essentially, even though we've been working together, this team for over 10 years. Companies raised enormous amounts of money, again, by not doing anything face to face. And one of the things that I think has been a bit strange for me, and I'd be interested to hear what everybody else thinks, is hiring people both into your own team and also into your portfolio companies without actually meeting them, and how we might be doing that slightly differently. We at SR1 take quite a lot of time to get to know people for our own team, but we've hired venture partners, we've hired associates and analysts. So that's been a bit of a new experience. But also we had one occasion in our portfolio company where we hired a very experienced CEO into a US company. He didn't even visit the company. He'd never been to see the company. He'd never met anybody from the company. So again, for experienced folks, that perhaps works. For your first-time CEOs, I think it's a bit more of a gamble, your first-time C-suite. So a lot of achievements, but a lot of things that I think are still work in progress. So far, so good on the hiring. Maybe one anecdote at board level before I sort of monopolize the conversation. Again, what do we miss? Well, we miss that sort of interaction with the teams at our portfolio companies during board meetings and with our fellow investors, hopefully around some dinners beforehand and just milling around during the breaks. That for me is a time that I miss a lot. That being said, for the majority of my portfolio companies, I have to say they're a bit more efficient on Zoom, on their board meetings, and things tend to go pretty well. You miss the spontaneous discussion. But I think, for me, we're probably going to see hybrid Zoom and face-to-face type board meetings go on for a little bit longer as we get used to maybe a little bit less travel, particularly transatlantically. For those of us who have board seats both sides of the Atlantic, we may think twice about going to every board meeting for efficiency of time. And actually, with a well-run meeting, it actually works.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. If I can comment, thanks for inviting me, Nanna Lüneborg from Novo Ventures. We've done, much the same. Been hiring people, onboarding people on Zoom, but I also think I think I sort of started out this whole process of doing things virtually, thinking that, well, good thing this is such a small industry, right? We've all known each other for years. All of us on this call have certainly known each other for years and interacted in person many times. So that overcomes that barrier to a large extent. But I'm actually reflecting on it now and thinking maybe it's not even necessary. I mean, we've just we've just, concluded multiple large new investments where I think we've benefited from very close collaboration with both the management team, our co-investors in the whole diligence process, including people that we've never met with other than behind the screen. But actually, when you have, daily or weekly interactions on a regular basis with people, and you talk to people also, when they just come back from their morning run, or they've just dropped off their children, or, it gives that kind of personal flavor. I think maybe we also need to recalibrate actually the importance of the face-to-face. Maybe it isn't actually so important. What is important is that we share a little bit of ourselves, of our private lives, or who we are kind of when we're not just at the office, and that builds the personal relationship. But actually, those things can also happen on the phone, on Zoom, on WhatsApp, or how we're communicating. I think I've been really positively surprised, and can't help but think that maybe it's been a record year because all of us have been working 5 days a week, not traveling for 3 days and working for 2 days and then 2 nights being jet lagged.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it has been long days as well. I mean, we've been able to flex our days, I think, depending on what hours we need to work rather than are expected to work.
Yeah.
Sometimes that works for you, sometimes it works against you. It just depends what time zones you're working in. But
yeah. But also so much easier to get hold of people. No one's traveling. You can always get a call within the next 2 days. So, yeah.
And hi, Stephan. I saw you've joined us. We were just talking about stories from the pandemic.
Yes.
Without
and that may be a good illustration that even people like me, which are not technologically first movers, eventually make our way to the video conferencing platforms after some 10 minutes of frantically trying. So yes, I think the COVID situation has all learned us to adapt remarkably well. But nice to see you all.
Hi, Stephan. So maybe I can add a few things.
Please.
Here, I think at the start of the pandemic, when we started kind of being forced to be online and at home rather than office or some kind of aeroplane, which sometimes became home, it was quite nerve-wracking actually. Telling someone who has been traveling for 2 days out of every week that you're not going to fly anywhere for a year, there has been, I'm sure, multiple high-level anxiety attacks. But it kind of calmed down after a couple of weeks, and then, at least from our side, we saw that the investments that we have done into new companies have gone pretty much into the ones that have been ongoing. There was a kind of a cool period where we thought, okay, so how do we do this without meeting the people? I mean, this has been the bread and butter of this industry, that you meet people, management teams, you see the company, you see that a building exists before you commit to significant investments. So it took a while to get used to that, and then, as my colleagues have stated, it kind of fell into place that you started building that relationship over the little boxes, as Debbie said, and various phone calls and video calls. I do think to get to know people over weeks and months, rather than you would normally spend 1 or 2 days over the span of a couple of weeks with management teams. So it took some adjustment before we went there. When I look at the numbers, similar to our peers here, we have had a very busy year. We have done 3 new investments, some exits, 2 IPOs, and 3 more new investments to come. And these have been all pretty much done online. Recruitment has been an issue. As stated, in fact, for us, it has been a true challenge to recruit people into companies, especially those companies that are at the growth stage, trying to attract international talent, where people have kind of reconsidered the work-life balance through the pandemic of, do I want to commit to a company that is in a different continent, with a team that I have never met before in person. So that truly has been a challenge. But the good things have been also there. I mean, we have seen everybody's pets, children, paintings, and some other stuff that we should all be happy about getting to know each other. But yeah, it'll remain to be seen how we continue. I think as traveling starts, my belief is that it'll be rather tough to kind of have the same flat understanding that everyone is on video, so everyone is kind of equal, rather than some people being in a room, some being on video. But anyway, I'll leave it there.
Right. So, you've mentioned, all of you have mentioned closing deals and making investments during that period. So I guess we can move on to the next question, which is what everyone is really here to listen to, I guess. So what are you investing in, and what are the areas that are hot, and what are areas that you're actually avoiding to invest in? And perhaps we can start with Stephan this time.
Yeah, I mean, we are in the position where we are building our fund, right? We had the first close last summer. We've done 4 investments so far, working on a couple of new ones, one hopefully being consummated this week. And so the areas that are hot and areas that are not, I think in oncology, there is always going to be new developments. There is so much happening there. I think we are all looking at all these fantastic cell therapy opportunities, probably way too many. So that's maybe not entirely hot. So I don't think there are any particular. I have difficulties in finding things that are sort of very hot, although there is obviously also trends in the investment industry. It's more to get the right mix of great science, great entrepreneurs, and a good syndicate with people that we trust and can work with. And if the stars are aligned on that, we will proceed. So we are not sort of, I wouldn't call the life science investing a fashion industry where there are things that are in fashion and out fashion very quickly, although there are trends, and I think the savvy investor is trying to both exploit those trends and avoid being too much affected by it.
Yeah, I think there are definitely. I mean, not just in terms of trends of things being fashionable, but I would guess I would put it more that technology is really maturing to deliver real progress. I mean, the last 2 investments that I've done have both been in bispecific oncology companies, so that's clearly my favorite in the Lava Therapeutics and just recently Numab as well. We've also just did Hummingbird, which is a Singapore-based company, not actually bispecifics, but nonetheless a novel twist on antibodies directed at specific epitopes. So I think that's an area where we think there's still so much innovation to come, and where all the molecules that are currently in the pipeline of sort of in phase 1 or some in phase 2, but very much in the early clinical development, the next 2 to 3 years will be super exciting to see some of those data points read out, and should hopefully be the next wave in immuno-oncology of actually delivering new targets and new ways of addressing existing targets that have been challenging in the past. And I think, from my own personal perspective, I think that's actually maybe more exciting than the cell therapy approaches, simply because of all the inherent challenges of cell therapy.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think, from our perspective, we like to look for the next big technology beyond the current, and perhaps Hakan, then we were pioneers in bispecific investment, being in it maybe a bit too early before it matured, right? But yeah, the promise is now there on the products. And we started 2 cell therapy companies, as you know, Nanna with Novo in the US, and are still interested in the space, but in a different way, in terms of thinking beyond the T cell, right? And which cell you might be able to use in a slightly different way. We have a company that's incubated in the UK that's in stealth in that area. I always think, neuro should be hotter than it is. It's a difficult space. Will we be, is the progress being made on biomarkers, at least in some areas, and other ways to, measure progress in disease? Is that going to come of age at some point? And at which point is that going to be? That's a challenge for us as investors, I think, as we look at that space. But certainly the combination of biomarkers, new modalities, an understanding of things which, you know, relate to disease progression, and potentially, let's see, right, very soon, if there's a first approval for something in Alzheimer's disease, and if that changes the landscape. Let's see. Still a tricky area. We look a lot, we do very little, but we like to find something. Yeah.
Yeah, same for us.
If I should mention one area where I think we begin to see something, it's in all the parts of our genome which has been classified as junk, the non-coding RNAs. It's still difficult, and it's still probably for some years yet going to be mainly basic science, but there is sort of bubbling along some interesting discoveries, and I think there's much more to be made in that area as well. And again, that is an area where there's been a maturation of the technology. So the oligonucleotide drugs, which are being very, very difficult to develop, there is obviously a lot of things happening in that area as well.
It's interesting that, you know, we're a little more narrow in our investment remit. So Novo Ventures, which is the corporate venture capital arm of the Merck Group, I lead healthcare investments, and we're early stage investors, so we invest in the strategic areas of interest of the mothership. Revolves around oncology, immuno-oncology, immunology, and women's health. And although, you know, in kind of on paper it's narrower than many of our peers as institutionals, it's still plenty of stuff to do. And in our investment activities, what we have been focused on is, of course, kind of going through the bread and butter of small molecules towards new targets, biologics, let's say antibodies mainly, again towards new target classes in these disease spaces. But we also started exploring for the last year on, you know, what is after antibodies and small molecules. What are the new modalities that one can do, perhaps, you know, further than cellular therapies, or more, let's call it smart, in lack of any better word, cellular therapies. And what else can be done on the RNA front? We have a couple of investments in the RNA field, both as small molecules modulating RNA, like Storm in Cambridge, UK, and direct binders for RNAs, which is Ribometrix in the US. And what you know, we're trying to explore what is coming after that. You know, what other modalities will have the potential to get towards the clinic as drugs. The other side that is quite interesting for us, and we see quite a bit of growth and interest, is the area of longevity. Now, longevity is not exactly a disease that you can put on a piece of paper. It's formed of multiple diseases. Neuro is a main part of that, neuroinflammation. But kind of trying to get to the core of, you know, how can it's not necessarily elongating life, but is ensuring that the life that a person has actually is continued at the best quality of life as possible. So that's a very interesting space for exploring. And of course, the women's health area, it's been a heavily ignored space. I think with each of my colleagues here, we have worked at some stage on some projects, some investments. It is gaining more strength. There are a couple of movements in this space that is creating enough companies with enough muscle to really bring activity. Like Myovant has been in the space. Obseva, one of our previous companies, have gone onto NASDAQ. There is the Organon. There's the Organon spin out from MSD. Our guys in the mothership are heavily driving on the IVF space per se. So this is an area that we really want to maintain a strong interest in.
I wanted to take the opportunity to remind our audience that you can always feel free to ask questions in the chat box, and we can address them in the Q&A at the very end. But sorry if I interrupted you, Hakan. I thought it was interesting that you all brought up so many different areas, and you really looked at it from different angles. There are modalities like bispecifics and cell therapies, and then there are areas of science like the genome junk and perhaps RNA, and then there are like therapeutic areas like women's health. But it's all about, sometimes it's not necessarily about the trends, but how you position a company inside it and how you really build a team and craft a thesis that can make sense or that can succeed. So I guess I wanted to also tap your thoughts on how to build a successful biotech these days. Like what are some of the essential components and what are some of the unique challenges that they're facing right now? And perhaps Nanna, with your experience with Novo Seeds and all the investment, you could offer some insights to start.
Sure, happy to. I mean, I think what we always think is the most important thing, apart from great technology and an incredible team, is an interesting problem to solve, a really clear, compelling value proposition. And I think this is why we're particularly excited about Numab. We just announced last week as a platform company that have been incredibly thoughtful and incredibly smart about selecting target combinations where a bispecific or multispecific approach can really make a difference, but where there's existing clinical data to validate each of the targets they're going after, and where they have a pretty clear and compelling story about how this new multispecific product is positioned in the clinical landscape. And I think that's so to have that and to have compelling product ideas, but then underpinned by a technology that can really address it, I think is sort of at the heart of everything that we're trying to do. And I think in particular with platform technology companies, I think too often we see companies that spend years honing and developing the toolbox and telling us, showing us a lot of fancy slides with molecular Lego and how they can build these sort of very fancy multimodal molecules, but they haven't spent anywhere near as much time thinking about what is the problem that they're trying to address with this technology, and that can actually be almost as hard as developing the technology itself. I also think that we often talk about kind of what are the differences between Europe and US. How can we learn from our successful colleagues in Boston and in the Bay Area? And I would say really thinking about and doing the homework on how does your product or technology fit into the patient landscape is something where we see quite a big difference between a lot of European early stage companies, which tend to be very technology focused. So, an academic spin out with, fantastic sciences, fantastic technologies, but their ideas about how to position it in the market or what the patient need is or what the, therapeutic relevance of the benefits their product offers are based on kind of desk research and just a fairly superficial treatment of this, instead of, we see an early stage company in Boston, they may still be in lead optimization, but they've already been out there speaking to patient organizations. They've been out there speaking to clinicians. They've spoken to all the KOLs in the area and kind of spent the first year of putting the company together, of building this real sort of end-to-end understanding of what is the need that they're trying to address. And that, again, feeds into this whole idea of, come up with a compelling vision for a problem you're trying to solve. And then I think everything else will kind of fall out from there.
Yeah, I agree with that, Nanna. And I have an example from our portfolio where we sort of took that academic piece and tried to put people and a structure around it to make it look a little bit more like it might have come out of the Bay Area or Boston. And that's MiroBio in Oxford, which is an agonist antibody company for autoimmune disease. Great science from the founders with insight into how immune cells signal to put a brake on the immune system and restore symbiosis there. Great academic work, fantastic start to the company, but no real drug discovery experience. The company was started by Samsara and OSI alongside a venture partner of SR1's, Elliot Charles. We have no CEO. We didn't start it with a CEO, so we took the academic founders and we just surrounded them with good advisors from wherever we could find them. So, we used our advisory network in the US very strongly to provide sort of drug discovery and development experience early in the company. We hired, first significant hire was a head of R&D, in fact, rather than anybody else who had experience actually pulling programs together, looking at milestones, looking at data packages, talking to KOLs, doing a bit of translational work. All of that was the first significant hire. And important to that also is from the get-go, we put a strong Series A syndicate around them. 4 investors, deep-pocketed, happy to wait. Didn't actually do a seed investment, went straight to a Series A. With the first tranche a little bit like a seed. So it allows the company, a bit of time to sort themselves out, to hone their story, and by the same time still have, good experienced investors, transatlantic syndicate also from the get-go around the company. And now made great progress, in a good position to think about fundraising later this year and to start partnering discussions, all on 2 tranches of a Series A, no CEO. We're recruiting in them.
Stephan, you want to chime in?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm just reflecting a little bit on Debbie's story, which is, of course, a great example of a company creation, also with the US angle. I think we all agree to get a syndicate with US investors is great, also for European science to build the company. It's just, it's easier said than done to build these strong syndicates and strong programs around great science without a team in place. I think as investors, we are so dependent on the management team in the company, so it's sort of a leap in the unknown to sort of embark on that. And many people say they will do it and can do it, but it really is it has to be really phenomenal science in order for this to happen. I mean, we are now working on one similar story, so we'll see, and that's very much a US investor who's involved, but actually predominantly built on, or actually exclusively built on science from Europe, from Sweden and the UK. But it does when it happens, it's great, but it's really difficult to pull off, I would say. And I would say if in the audience there are aspiring entrepreneurs, there are certainly they should be aware that most of the investments we do are in teams and companies that are built and where we hopefully can provide value and help in building the teams, but sort of doing it all from scratch on sort of the investor engagement is great when it happens, but it's also it's really hard to pull off. So kudos for you, Debbie, when we're trying and working with this.
It's critical. Your point's very important, though, Stephan. You can't do many of them. I mean, even big funds, you just can't do many of them. And when we all sit on 4 or 5 boards, it's not me doing it; it's our venture partner doing it, who's a company builder and was a founder of Principia and has done the playbook. And it's so we can't do many. We want to do more. And it's a question of we're thinking very hard about how can we do more of those in Europe with all of the, we've also got a couple more venture partners in Europe. Our other one is helping us with the stealth company that I was talking about in the UK with next gen cell therapy modality. So, they're fully occupied now. So how can we do more of these and make it successful? And is it that we partner with our other investors, like some of us on the call today? Do we use our networks better? I think we're generally very cooperative in Europe as investors, much more so than we see in the US. But maybe there's a way that we can get our heads together and do this better.
Maybe I can comment on that a little bit. Thanks, Nanna. So because of the strategic angle and the focus on new technologies, we are actually one of those that does the company creation a lot. And of course, we want to build the optimal profile, the phenotype in a company, in a young company. That's not always possible, and it's not the lack of money in Europe. So we invest globally. I'm just focusing on the European example here. So there is more than enough cash available in Europe to invest in these companies to help build. Nonetheless, the timelines, the holding periods of these investments can be comparatively long. So institutional funds have an aversion usually getting involved in these early stage companies, and helping perhaps build that team, the technology, the market relevance, and be able to sell that externally. And we work with our institutional colleagues when that is ready. But in the heavy lifting is left for us and the likes of us who kind of get in early and then try to build that. And some of them succeed, some of them don't, as it is with this space. So I think the core then it comes to identifying the right kind of management or people who could be the right management in the future. So it's not just the entrepreneurs, but also people that have the makeup to be those in the future. And that's not easy. It takes a lot of time, a lot of heavy lifting. So the way that we look at it is to at least try and syndicate that with a number of people who are ready to help that heavy lifting in Europe, be that institutional or corporate venture funds. So quite a number of, there is a bunch of articles that go, up and down in various press pieces that corporate ventures do quite a lot of that. And if you look at some of our early companies, it's basically just a bunch of corporate venture funds that are sitting on the cap table of those companies.
On the other hand, I think that like just with the bounty of money that has been flowing into our industry over the last few years, and the record size funds that a lot of different fund managers are succeeding to raise, I think we're also seeing more and more investors are turning to company creation as a major part of their investment strategy and investment portfolio. I mean, obviously, we've been doing it a long time in Novo Holdings with Novo Seeds and building companies, and I think that's really an effort that where we're doubling down. We're thinking that actually we need to put more money into each early stage company to build it better from the outset. But I think we're seeing a lot of the financially driven institutional VCs doing the same. I think Forbion is adopting that strategy much more. Sofinova has always been doing it, I guess. F Prime are doing it with their create opportunities. Syncona was obviously founded to do exactly this. So I think there is definitely an increasing interest and activity in the company creation stage. Very much driven by investors and founders rather than driven, perhaps less so, by entrepreneurs, I would say.
And Hakan, to follow up on what you said about the unique set of limitations or characteristics of European LPs or the funds. So what are there any I guess particular sweet spots for European entrepreneurs or European biotechs where maybe Europe is leading, or that could be a bit that differentiates it from the rest of the world?
I mean, it's a good question. It's probably impossible to answer, Amber. So quite a number of exciting is probably a very boring word. High potential technologies for drug development have actually first emerged in Europe. Then through company building, through finance needs, management needs, some of these have ended up in the US in development. So that's just as a kind of an umbrella comment. Maybe I can give a solid example here. So when we created Storm Therapeutics out of Cambridge from technologies of Tony Koutsarides and Eric Mishka, from the work that those two founders have put together, it was the first RNA epigenetic modulating company that was created. This was 2015. And this was then followed by a number of similar companies in the US, where some of our colleagues here have been involved in. So that's an example of where you can actually start building some of these technologies, which are pretty keen in Europe. Nonetheless, it needs the confidence from the investor side to actually go and do that. Okay, here are two fantastic papers, pretty amazing founder team. let's get involved and try to build a company together. And we did that with Imperial Innovations at the time, Pfizer Ventures, ourselves, and CIC, which is of course very closely networked into Cambridge University. So if I then kind of think of another one that kind of came up pretty fast in that space was Artios in the DNA damage repair space, but focusing on a total new set of targets. And we did that with SVLS. Actually, it was Kate who gave the talk earlier on, and that was again one of the originating ideas in Europe that was then followed up in the US. So there are some of these, but I think we need to, as European companies, I'm kind of saying we, as my board seats on European companies, we need to make sure that we can also communicate this wider, better, and make sure that we can actually get into that optimal phenotype that I talked about earlier, with enough money, enough network, and somewhat of an experience, either management team or network around the company's board to enable that to come through. I don't know if that answered it, Amber.
I think this sort of divide between US and Europe has always been a topic of any conference for the last many decades. And there will always be some differences, right? And yes, there are more capital flowing into the industry, but seeing a Sana $700 million Series A, just that is not happening in Europe. And I don't think necessarily it should. I mean,
but is that really true? Look at the mega rounds that ADC Therapeutics raised, or that BioNTech raised.
Yeah.
Very public. It does happen. Yeah.
Maybe times are finally. But is it a good thing? Maybe to some extent. I think there is a greater capital efficiency in Europe. I think you can go further on the liter, more miles per gallon. To some extent. So I think there is a room for both the more sort of project-focused way to do things that have been prevailing in Europe, and the more blue sky kind of opportunities that have been funded in the US. And maybe, yes, Nanna, you're right. Maybe the things are the differences are blurring. But I think there's also maybe a certain rationale for the ways things have been done in Europe, being a little bit more capital efficient in reaching the goals.
I would say that I think one topic we've often discussed as a big limitation for Europe, for European biotech to really ascend to compete on the global stage, has been the difficulty in building sufficiently experienced teams. And I think to some extent this whole COVID experience has been a great leveler for all of us, right? Because I think we've all realized it doesn't matter that I can't hire a colleague in Copenhagen. I can just hire Hakan and we can just Zoom with each other every day. And that works perfectly fine. And so for European companies, I think that should also, not that they weren't before, but I think before everyone was more hesitant when they were hiring, a CMO or CFO who was physically distant from the rest of the company. Whereas now I think it ought to just be second nature and, not make such a big deal out of it. I mean, if there are 9 time zones away, that makes it awkward. But, either elsewhere in Europe or on the East Coast really shouldn't be a hindrance.
Yeah. And I think the international, making sure there's a non-European outlook, a non-UK outlook for a company. It doesn't really matter where they're founded, right? It's a global business. We invest globally. Products are for global healthcare. Having that global outlook in every aspect from the get-go, the people you hire, the way you position your company, the messaging you take, the type of investors that you try to attract. I think it's really, really important message for me to our, entrepreneurs and companies that are listening. It's super important. It's super important for us as a fund. When we look at a company, this is how we think. We think, what's the impact, that this company is going to make? Doesn't really matter where it is. Is it going to play on the global stage? Can we attract good people and good investors to it? In addition to, is the science great? And are they solving a problem of relevance? It's the whole package, really. So I think I would encourage, management teams, entrepreneurs to really think globally. We quite often find ourselves saying to companies in Europe, we really think you should raise more money.
Yeah, we have the same conversation all the time.
That's one of our very favorite.
Be more ambitious.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Interesting. Well, a reminder to participants, your last chance to ask questions. We have a few minutes left. I don't see it. Oh, there it is. Right. Yeah, let's, I think this goes back to the point about neuro that Debbie was making earlier. Are there, what are some areas, like as you look at the market today, as you look at companies today, what are some areas that you think are underappreciated, and where are, I guess, the research coming from in those underappreciated areas that people could be looking at?
Yeah, in reference to that particular question about brain tumor research, you know, it resonates. I totally get that. I mean, one of the things that I do, in addition to being SR1 partner, is I sit on the board of CRT, the Cancer Research Technology, which is part of Cancer Research UK. So we're constantly discussing areas which are really difficult to fund from an investment point of view. And, you know, we were discussing one startup company the other day, which unfortunately has to be wound down because it was in glioblastoma area, and the proof of concept, even at the science level, did not pan out with some seed funding. So it's really, really tough, this space, you know, recognized. I don't have the answer to that, but, you know, what I would say is that, you know, we see quite a lot of companies. I was talking to a company only yesterday, in fact, with a new small molecule approach, which could be applied to oncology. We were talking about target selection. And, you know, the way that they would think about, they're starting to think about getting into CNS as an area is via oncology, but picking a target which could be broader than just brain tumors, start in peripheral tumors, but relevant to brain tumors. You know, it's a difficult space. There's no ideal answer, but, you know, be encouraged that we do see companies that are thinking about it. And we, you know, I sit on an organization that's thinking how best to fund this space, which might not necessarily be venture, to be honest.
It's a good point that Debbie makes. I mean, that's pretty much the same challenge that you have in many companies. Or when you're going after something that is novel, what's the timeline and the cost to building more confidence that your approach is going to be the right approach that fits that kind of market relevance that Nanna actually mentioned at the start of our session. And it's challenging. I mean, in CNS, you are, you know, you have all good intentions, but you're trying to modify the disease in patients where by the time they're diagnosed, the damage have been multiplexed. And how do you reverse that damage? So CNS is one aspect. Endometriosis, totally different. Women's health is another aspect where you have extraordinary growth in the uterus, in and outside of the uterus in endometriosis. And how do you handle that through modulating the hormonal pattern without affecting the systemic effects of cutting out hormones in reproductive, otherwise healthy women. So high bar from the tox perspective, high bar from regulatory perspective, and an additional, let's say, I wouldn't call it whatever the opposite of sweetener is the regulatory thinking that for anything in endometriosis, you have to meet a pain endpoint, which is the end result of the disease, but doesn't really reflect on what stage it is. So how do you actually get there? So more and more in companies and projects, and this includes also pharma side, that you try to actually build that biomarker side that Debbie has focused on how do you really build that level of confidence on the way while you're spending the money and building the company, that you will at least have a, you know, kind of a couple of percents on the right-hand side rather than the left-hand side, that you're actually going to get there. It's a challenge that we'll all face, and the biomarker and the new technologies will hopefully help access some of those decision-making points and building confidence in this.
Right. I think we're coming up against time, so unless anyone has any closing remarks or wanted to answer that, take another stab at that question, it's been a really fruitful conversation. I think I've really enjoyed it. It's good to see all of you, and thanks everyone else for joining us.